Thank you. Thank you. So after a whole afternoon of temperature management and quality, are we ready to adopt or not to adopt? Are we ready to adopt? Yes? Yes. Hands up. So my presentation is on the drivers and the barriers to adoption. So I have done this research with the mango industry. At the beginning, my daytime job is I work with the horticulture industry to develop export markets. And part of it is when I was overseas, there's always a problem with cold chain, and there was always a problem with quality. But the problem is not just in the domestic market. It's also in the overseas market. It is also in the domestic market. So every year, you, horticulture producers, lose about $3 billion in food waste. In worst, 20 to 40% of all fruit and vegetables grown in Australia are rejected before they even reach these supermarkets. Where is the loss? Where do you think the loss is in the value chain? Production, consumption? See, most of the loss is in the production sector. And with some of the losses in the consumption center, at the consumption level. And that's why, because when you get a product, there is something wrong with it and you lose it, you waste it. But the government, the federal government has developed this trying to launch this strategy, waste reduction strategy, and the plan is to reduce losses by 50% by the year 2030. But it's not just the government, but it's also all the supermarkets. They're going for this zero food waste by the year 2025, some, or the year 2030. And what is going to happen is you, as the growers, will be the ones that are going to be making these changes. The good thing is they're going to be using technology to reduce waste. In the past, agriculture has been very good in adopting technologies. But now with digital technologies, we have the power of increasing. Sorry.
It's the top one that you use here.
So if you adopt new technologies, which the technology we'll be talking about, most of the increases in production in GDP will be in vegetables, will be in the post-harvest sector. But the problem is that a lot of the technologies that support cold chain systems are not being adopted. This study was done a few years ago, but this still continues. A lot of the horticulture is the sector of agriculture that is not really adopting technologies to support price and quality signals. So this study was done in the mango industry, was done a few years ago, 2 years ago, 2 seasons ago. And using the dark trackers, they found that this is temperature management, that over 65% of the produce going from the pack house to the ripener was outside temperature range. So, and this was the first time that the growers had ever seen this. Most growers assume that the product was traveling well because few of them had in the past been told that there was a problem with the product. But when you talk to them, when you talk to most businesses assume they have really good cold chain practices. But after me talking to a few, around 50 people in the supply chain, I found that there were a lot of mismanagement within the chain. It all starts with the grower. And this is, again, this is in the mango industry. Because in the mango industry, they only have 4 to 6 weeks growing period. There are just not enough cooling rooms when the season is on. So the produce is not cool before it is dispatched. Then at the transporter, there are not that many modern trucks. We think there are, but there are not that many modern trucks in Australia. There's not enough transport. There is a lot, what Nolan was saying, what he was saying, there is a lot of mixed cargo being transported at the same time. And the main thing is the energy cost. There's so many stories of truck drivers turning off the air cooling system as they leave the farm and just turning it on as they're going to get into the center. Then there are problems at the wholesaler level because it is really frustrating. They just want to get the product out. And sometimes they're not really cooling the product properly. There are problems with the packaging. But the main thing is with the wholesaler is that the wholesaler doesn't really tell the growers, doesn't want to tell the growers if there are any problems with the product. And why? Because they want to keep you happy. So they never tell you there are problems. And then, they're at the ripener level, they get the product warm, but because there is not enough time, they just get it like that. And at the end, at the retailer level, more problems. And if you are exporting, it is even worse. And at the times when it gets to the market, for instance, in mangoes, mangoes are tropical fruit, and you send it to the US, or you send, because it's winter over there, so they don't have facilities, and the mangoes sometimes are there at 0 degrees, so it gets damaged too. So this is just some statements from the supply chain, and that gives you an idea of what people are saying. And maybe some of them resonate with you. So some of the ripeners believe the temperature, compared to everything else is going on in the farm, is not really one of the priorities. Some of the retailers believe the storage in Australia in general is quite poor. The third one is, what I was saying, that the wholesaler never gives bad news to the grower. Therefore, you never get that feedback loop, quality loop, and so you don't really know what's happening. The next one is the trust. Trust is a big issue in the industry, and when there is no trust, there is no share information, there's no communication. And then is this cost. These data loggers, they were talking about the pricing before. They can get up to $100 per truck. It depends on the season, how many you're going to be using. But finally, if the supermarket wants it, and so that's what a lot of people are saying in the mango industry, if the supermarket wants it, it's going to happen. So this is my takeaway message from that supply chain mapping, is that there are inefficiencies across the chain. It's not just up to the growers, or just to the production sector, but to everyone. And at the end of the day, cold chain practices are supply chain failure. But the question is, after all that, what are the drivers and barriers to adoption? What do you think the barriers are? Yeah, they are. Number one is lack of trust. Even with USBs, I've been told that many times businesses actually lose the USBs on purpose, or they don't send them back on purpose. And the reason is because people don't want, if, for example, as a wholesaler or retailer, if they have something wrong, they don't want the grower to know that has happened. Cost. Cost is not just the price of the device, but it's also the price of the tracking and the price of the internet. But also, once you know that there is a shortcoming in your supply chain, you have to change practices. Do you have the funds to change practices later? Then the next one is technical issues in the ICT skills. You still need people in your business that know how to manage this, the data that comes from these data loggers. And the data loggers themselves have some issues. For instance, with the USBs, they get lost, for instance. With the RFIDs, you need to have really good links with your partners so you can have the RFID hubs in their businesses. With the SIM-based, you really need to have good connectivity so the data is being recorded. The other one is called change attitudes. Even though everyone believes that temperature is important, and they believe that they have cold chain systems in place in their own business, they also believe that small changes in temperature doesn't make any difference. That at the end of the day, that's what it is. If they say, I didn't cool my produce well enough, or the transporter is not doing something well enough, 1 hour here, 1 hour there, 1 hour there, they still think it's not going to make any difference. But as we found out from the experts, it makes a big difference to the end product. But there is the belief in the industry that if I look after the product well enough, when it is under my care, I don't have to really consider the whole supply chain. And the other one is the value of the data. So people say, so what? So what if I get all this data? What am I going to do with it? And this is just a very prevalent view within the supply chain. What are you going to do with the data? How am I going to make changes to my business? Just by having the data, that doesn't tell you what to do. You need to know a bit more about that. But as there are barriers, there are also drivers that encourage adoption. So the number one is quite obvious. So if you have businesses that enjoy, or people in the business that enjoy working with technology, yes, of course, they'll be more open and they'll adopt this technology, or they'll have a go at this technology. But the supply chains and culture influence is very important. So that's why in the mango industry, after they did that research, the Mango Industry Association did that research, now they are tracking almost 60% of the production, but someone had to drive it. In this case, was the mango industry, I assume, with her innovation. Then trust in the technology is very important. You need to trust the technology itself that is doing what it's meant to do, but you also need to trust the developer. And the next one is the legal and other requirements, and this case in the export market is the insurance. A lot of the insurance companies that ask you to have a data logger as condition of cover. But the main driver is that because increased transparency and new process. And this is a little story I want to share with you. This was a small grower, and he came to me and he said he was having problems and he was losing a lot of money, and no one in the supply chain wanted to take responsibility. So I introduced him to one of these companies. They did the tracking, and they found out that it was the transport company. But then the transport company had all the systems in place, and they said it couldn't be them because everything, they checked everything. But on that day, at that time, they had employed a contractor. And the contractor is the one who had the faulty systems. And that's how this small grower can then go to the transporter by having one of these devices, go to the transporter and prove that it wasn't his fault, that there was no problem with his own product, but it was a problem with the transport company, with the contractor. And he saved $40,000 in just one. And so this is my key learnings. So usually you don't have much visibility of your product, but these technologies give you a way or being informed or having a look at what's happening to your product. These technologies are not miracles. You still have to know how to use them. You still have to know about post-harvest, but they give you greater visibility. That's why I say that they still need a bit of further development. A problem with this is the cost. To this stage, it's only the growers paying for this. So I believe there need to be some cost-sharing solutions, because the ones that benefit the most from these technologies will be the retailers and will be the exporters in many cases. But so far, the only ones that are paying for this are the growers. So there must be some sort of share costing. You still need ICT skills to be able to analyze and interpret the readings. And we just need to be aware that the supply chain partners may mandate that you use these devices, and so you need to be ready, prepare for when this happens. So this is a bit of a being an academic, more being academic. So my presentation has touched on the reasons why this is in the mango industry. There has been some reluctance to use temperature data loggers, and some of them may apply to vegetables. But adoption of these technologies can give you an insider view of what's happening in your supply chain. So this is the end. You just want to know, did I convince you? Did I give you enough reasons why some of these you should be using some of these technologies? Because at the end of the day, what we're doing here is in the job of adoption. So maybe I want to hear from one of the growers. Any comments? I'm pointing at you. Any comments? Any questions? So can you see the benefit to your business?
Yeah, I think definitely there's benefit in it. I guess there is, I think that some of the barriers. Sorry. Yeah, no worries. I think we can definitely see the benefits in the technologies that we've been presented, and I guess the barriers to adoption are real and something that we all have to deal with in our businesses. But I think that's being aware of them, being upfront about them, and then measuring the benefit is all up to us.
Thank you. Yeah,
no
thank
worries.
you. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Edith. You listed 5 barriers and 5 drivers. That's a lot to work on. Which ones would you actually pick in terms of priorities that would make the biggest difference?
Number 1 will be to really explain to the growers and the whole industry what is the value of the technology in terms of either economic gains or waste reductions. The value is very important, because sometimes we push a technology from a developer or academic or a government point of view, but at the end of the day, the grower needs to make money. So if we can somehow present to them that, yes, you can either make money or reduce inputs by using these technologies, then I think that will be my number 1. And my number 2 will be for the developers and academics and the government to work together and ask the growers what do they need, and not just to the growers, but the whole supply chain. What do they need, and how can we make it better? Because sometimes, again, a lot of the technologies are developed in isolation from the users, and that's why some of them are not adopted, or people adopt them at the beginning and then just leave them. So in my research, I use behavioral theory, psychology, to understand as to why people were using it. And at the end of the day, it came to beliefs, basic beliefs. Because beliefs affect attitudes, which affect behavior. And in the mango industry at that time, the belief was, as I said, that small changes in temperature doesn't make any difference to the product. That was the prevalent belief. I don't know if it is the same in vegetables, because I haven't done this study in vegetables, but that was the prevalent belief in mangoes. The small changes don't make any difference. Besides, there's a difference between mangoes and vegetables. The mangoes, they are green by the time it gets to the in the supply chain. So people never see the problem with it. Like, maybe with vegetables you'll see it wilting, but with mangoes people never saw it. So it could go through the whole supply chain, but people never physically saw the change. So they assume no change, no damage was happening until it actually gets to the end, to the consumer. And that also is quite similar also with avocado, with some of the other crops. But it may be different for vegetables.
So, one last question. Yeah, thanks.
I'm going to be the devil's advocate here. So your one of the slides you put up, you said majority of the spoilage that's happening is at the production point, is in when the producer is, and that is sort of multiple factors come into that. Yeah. That is, the environmental factors, climate change, fertilizer, soil type, everything. So how is it that we're going to put the return and reduce the spoilage at the production level by putting just a temperature logger in one part of the supply chain and not look at the whole supply chain? So how are we going to convince our producers to say the data log is going to just solve your cold chain problem, but if the product that has left the producer has been impacted by a lot of the rain, the floods, everything else, the washing away of the soil that has happened, how is that going to be utilized or captured in that process?
That is the devil's advocate, because that's a scientist. But so I looked at it from the temperature cold change point of view. I'm making the assumption here that a lot of the product that is wasted, some of it, if it's already in the supply chain, the grower at some point in time decided this product was good enough and someone in the supply chain was going to buy it. So growers won't put product in the supply chain that doesn't have a buyer at the end. So product that is damaged already won't go into the supply chain, because maybe vegetable growers can say here, if you already know that the product is damaged, it won't go into the supply chain. You try to put the product that will have even if it is a class B, class A, class B, even if it's a lower class, it will already have a buyer at the end. Otherwise, you wouldn't put it in the supply chain. So a lot of the problems in the wastage is shortcomings of the cold chain. They're not shortcomings of the product itself, because at the very beginning, the grower has decided that this product is good enough to go into the market. Am I right? You won't put product that is not right to go into the market. You won't put it. You won't spend that money packaging it, put it into the transport company. Am I right? The product is already, it has to be really good enough to go into through the supply chain. So any shortcomings, most of it will be shortcomings of the cold chain. As the scientist, maybe, the scientist might have a different opinion.
No. Anyway, that was good. Yeah, it's an interaction of sociology and technology, and it happens at every level. And we still haven't, a lot of growers, really, not the big ones, but the smaller ones, there's still this farm gate mentality that existed, I don't know, when Edith was a little girl. So, it's still there. So,
Thank you.
Anyway,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edith.